Welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into some fascinating concepts from B.F. Skinner's Science and Human Behavior.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, I think so too. Specifically, how control, or maybe even more importantly, the perception of control, can impact behavior in some pretty unexpected ways.
Yeah, we're talking about unintended consequences.
Exactly. Ever feel like the more someone tries to box you in, the more you kind of want to break free?
Yeah.
That's exactly the kind of thing we're going to be exploring.
That's a great way to put it. Those ripples that spread out, you don't even realize how far they go when you try to control a situation or a person.
And as ABA professionals, this is something we really need to be mindful of, right?
Absolutely.
So who better to guide us through this than the father of operant conditioning himself, B.F. Skinner?
Oh, yeah.
His work really laid the groundwork for how we understand behavior and how it can be changed.
He shifted the focus from internal states, thoughts and feelings,
Yeah.
to what we can actually observe
Right.
behavior and the environment that shapes it.
And in this chapter, he dives into how people react when they feel controlled. Like, think about a client who cancels sessions last minute,
Yeah.
a student who disrupts class,
Yeah.
or someone who's outwardly agreeable but never seems to make any progress. He lays out these three main reactions: escape, revolt,
Okay.
and passive resistance.
These are all ways that
Yeah.
people react to control, even if they aren't doing it consciously.
Exactly. It might not even be something they're aware of. So that client who's canceling, maybe they're trying to escape
Right.
a situation that just feels overwhelming to them.
Yeah, totally.
The student disrupting the class, maybe they're in open revolt
Mm-hmm.
against a task they just think is totally unfair.
Yeah, or the rules in general.
And that person who seems agreeable but doesn't make progress,
Right.
they might be engaged in passive resistance. It's like this subtle way of pushing back
Mm-hmm.
without directly confronting whatever the source of control is.
Yeah, you see this a lot, I think. And what's interesting is that
Oh, yeah.
these reactions often lead to the people in control.
Right.
Whether it's parents or teachers or even us as therapists, to tighten the reins even more.
Right, so you can see how this becomes a vicious cycle.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like trying to hold sand in your fist.
Yeah.
The tighter you squeeze, the more slips away.
It's a great analogy.
So we see these outward behaviors, but what about what's going on beneath the surface? Skinner talks about these emotional byproducts of control, especially when punishment is involved.
And this is where things get really interesting. And as ABA professionals, I think it's really important for us. We need to be aware that our interventions, even if they're intended to be positive,
Right.
can sometimes have emotional consequences.
Exactly. He talks about fear, anxiety, anger, and depression as like these common emotional byproducts.
Think about a child.
Yeah.
If they're constantly criticized
Yeah.
for making mistakes, that could lead to a fear of failure,
Right.
and that can impact them long term, throughout their life. Or imagine a teenager punished for expressing their emotions.
Oh, yeah.
They might learn to bottle things up, which leads to anxiety and resentment later on.
And those bottled up emotions can show up in so many different ways, right?
Absolutely.
Skinner even discussed physical health consequences, what he called psychosomatic disorders.
Right, but his point was that these aren't just some mysterious mind-body connection.
Right.
They actually stem from a person's learning history, their experiences with control and punishment in their environment.
So we've got escape, revolt, passive resistance, and this whole cocktail of potential emotional responses.
Yeah.
But the rabbit hole goes even deeper, doesn't it?
It does.
Skinner also talks about how control, especially through punishment,
Yeah.
can shape what we call operant behaviors, the actions we take to interact with our environment.
This is where we see how controlling practices can really backfire,
Right.
leading to behavior patterns that seem counterintuitive.
For example, he talks about drug addiction as a form of escape. Someone might turn to substances as a way to temporarily escape those negative emotions or situations, especially if those situations have been associated with punishment.
It's like they're seeking refuge, trying to numb themselves
Right.
from the pain of their experiences.
Then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, excessively vigorous behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Think about those individuals who engage in risky behavior
Right.
or thrill-seeking activities.
Mm-hmm.
Skinner suggests this could be a way of counteracting those feelings of boredom or stagnation that come from a highly controlled environment.
It really flips the script on how we typically view those behaviors, doesn't it?
It does.
Instead of labeling them as inherently problematic, we consider what
Right.
function they might be serving.
And speaking of functioning, there's also excessively restrained behavior,
Yeah.
where people become overly cautious, inhibited, almost frozen
Yeah.
by the fear of making a mistake.
Right.
and facing the consequences.
It's as if they're constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to take any action that might lead to punishment or disapproval.
It's like their behavior is being dictated by, like, the ghost of punishments past.
Oh, yeah.
Even if,
Powerful stuff.
right, even if those punishments are no longer a threat.
Exactly.
But wait, there's more. It gets even more complex. He talks about this thing called defective stimulus control.
So imagine someone who's been punished for expressing their needs or desires. Over time, they might have difficulty distinguishing between safe and unsafe situations, sort of overgenerating that threat of punishment to situations where it's not even warranted anymore.
And that can lead to some pretty serious consequences.
It can. Misinterpretations of reality, social isolation, and can even contribute to things like paranoia or delusions.
And then there's the impact on self-knowledge. Skinner suggested people might distort their own self-perception as a way to escape the sting of self-criticism. Think of someone who's constantly boasting to cover up their feelings of inadequacy.
It's like they're building this wall of defense mechanisms to protect themselves from painful self-judgments, a way of escaping that internal punishment that they put on themselves.
And perhaps the most challenging concept of all, aversive self-stimulation.
This is where things get really complex.
Right.
Individuals might engage in self-harm or seek out punishment as a way to alleviate guilt or anxiety, creating a sense of control in situations that feel overwhelmingly out of control.
It's a difficult concept to grasp.
Yes.
But it highlights the need for us as ABA professionals to approach these situations with sensitivity and a deep understanding of that individual's history and the function of their behavior.
It's about recognizing that even seemingly harmful behaviors can serve a purpose.
Right.
And our job is to understand that purpose and help the individual find more adaptive ways to meet those needs.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from those initial reactions to control to the emotional and behavioral byproducts that can arise. It's clear that control, while sometimes necessary, can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond our initial intentions.
It really can.
And that's why it's so important for us as ABA professionals to be mindful of these dynamics.
Absolutely.
And to approach our interventions with a deep understanding of the potential consequences.
Both intended and unintended.
Right, both the intended and the unintended consequences. But how do we do that in practice?
Yeah.
What does all this mean for our work with clients? You know, we're working with these principles of behavior change day in and day out. And let's be honest, that can involve a certain degree of control.
It can, yeah. Which is exactly why understanding these concepts is so important, you know?
Right.
We need to be ethical and mindful of the impact our interventions can have.
It's like walking a tightrope, isn't it?
It is.
We need to be effective, but we also need to avoid those unintended consequences we talked about. But luckily, Skinner didn't just leave us hanging with a list of potential pitfalls.
Right.
He also offers some insights into how we can actually mitigate these negative effects, particularly when it comes to therapy. He had some really interesting things to say about psychotherapy as a unique form of control.
Yeah.
What he called counter control.
It's a fascinating concept.
It is.
Think of it this way. If someone's learned to avoid or revolt against or passively resist control because of negative experiences, therapy can actually help them unlearn those responses and heal those wounds, so to speak.
So it's not about imposing a new set of controls, but about helping them break free from those past experiences that might still be shaping their behavior in unhealthy ways.
That's a great way to put it.
And one of the ways therapy accomplishes this is by providing what Skinner called a non-punishing audience. Imagine you've spent years being criticized or punished for expressing your emotions, your needs, your true self. You learn to keep those things hidden.
Right. It's like you build these walls around yourself.
So therapy provides a safe space to let those walls down, to finally express those thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment or reprisal.
Exactly. And that's essential because as long as those behaviors and emotions are suppressed, they can't be addressed. It's like trying to treat an infection without cleaning the wound first.
Makes sense. So you create that safe environment, that non-punishing audience. And then what? How does the counter control come in?
Well, once those suppressed behaviors and emotions start to emerge, therapy can move into like a second stage where the focus shifts to facilitating extinction of the condition aversive stimulation.
Okay, so in simpler terms, it's about helping the individual unlearn
Right.
the association between certain behaviors or emotions and those negative consequences they've come to expect.
Yeah. Think about
Hmm.
if a client has been punished for speaking their mind in the past,
Hmm.
they might avoid expressing themselves
Right.
in any situation,
Right.
even if it's safe to do
Even
so.
when it's appropriate.
Right, exactly.
So therapy would involve gradually exposing them to situations where they can practice expressing themselves without those negative consequences,
Right.
helping them realize that those old associations aren't true anymore.
Exactly. It's about breaking those chains.
Right.
Freeing them from the grip of those
Mhm.
past experiences that are dictating their behavior in the present.
It sounds like a really gradual process.
It is.
Lots of undoing those patterns.
It is, yeah.
But I can imagine how liberating that would be for someone.
It can be truly transformative.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that this process of counter control through therapy
Hmm.
can sometimes clash with other controlling forces in a person's life.
You mean like family dynamics or societal expectations or even religious beliefs?
Exactly. If the insights or changes that occur through therapy
Yeah.
challenge those existing system of control,
Yeah.
it can create friction.
Right.
For example, if a client is encouraged to set boundaries with a controlling family member,
Yeah.
that might cause conflict within the family system.
It's like two different sets of rules colliding.
Yeah.
And it creates this push and pull.
Right. And this is where things can get really tricky for us as ABA professionals, especially when we're working with clients
Right.
whose cultural or religious beliefs differ from our own. We need to be incredibly sensitive. We need to be willing to collaborate
Right.
with other professionals involved in the client's care. And above all, we need to respect the client's values
Right.
and beliefs, even if they're different from our own.
It's about finding that balance between supporting their growth and honoring their autonomy.
Beautiful put.
We can't impose our own values or beliefs,
Right.
but we can provide that space for them to explore their own values and make choices that feel right for them.
And this idea of counter control through therapy is just one aspect of Skinner's perspective on how to address those negative effects of control.
Right.
He also had some pretty revolutionary ideas about how we view mental illness, challenging those traditional notions of inner causes and focusing on what we can observe, behavior in the environment.
He's all about shifting that focus, wasn't he?
Was.
Instead of trying to diagnose some neuroses or
Right.
personality flaw, he encourages us to look at the function of the behavior, the purpose it serves for that individual in their environment.
It's a much more empowering perspective. Instead of labeling someone as broken or defective, we're looking for the reasons behind the behavior,
Right.
the needs they're trying to meet, the challenges they're facing.
So instead of asking what's wrong with this person,
Right.
we're asking what happened to this person and what are they trying to accomplish with this behavior.
That's the heart of it. It's about seeing the individual, not the diagnosis, and recognizing that behavior is always meaningful. It's always communicating something,
Yeah.
even if that message is hard to decipher at first.
And that's where our skills as ABA professionals come in. We're trained to be those behavior detectives,
Exactly.
looking for those clues in the environment that can help us understand the function.
We're looking for those antecedents, the triggers that precede the behavior.
Right.
The consequences that follow it. We're looking for patterns, relationships
Yeah.
that help us unlock the mystery.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, right?
It is.
But instead of a static picture, we're trying to understand this dynamic process, this interplay between the individual and their world.
It's complex.
It is. But once we understand that process,
Right.
we can start to develop interventions that actually address the root of the problem rather than just slapping a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Exactly.
So instead of just trying to suppress a challenging behavior,
Right.
we're looking for ways to teach new skills, to modify the environment, to create opportunities for them to meet their needs in more fulfilling ways.
That's the goal. It's about empowering the individual, helping them gain control over their own lives, and creating a world where they can thrive.
And that brings us to another one of Skinner's revolutionary ideas, debunking this notion of pent-up behavior. This one really challenges how we think about behavior.
It does, yeah. He argued against this idea that behavior is something that builds up inside us, like steam in a pressure cooker and needs to be released.
So it's not about venting or expressing those pent-up emotions.
Right.
It's about understanding what's making those emotions
Exactly.
more or less likely to occur.
Yeah. He emphasized that behavior
Right.
is best understood in terms of its current probability of occurring
Right.
and the variables that are influencing it
Right.
at that moment.
So, for example, if a child is having frequent tantrums, we wouldn't assume it's because they have some pent-up aggression that
Right.
needs to be released. We'd look at the environmental triggers for those tantrums,
Exactly.
the consequences that might be reinforcing, or the skills they might be lacking to communicate their needs effectively.
It highlights how a behavioral approach
Yeah.
can really shift our focus away from those internal states and onto those observable things that we can address.
It's about being proactive, not just reactive, right?
Exactly.
Instead of waiting for behavior to erupt,
Right.
we're trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. Changing the environment, teaching new skills, giving them the tools to regulate their own behavior.
And that focus on prevention is crucial because the more we can prevent those challenging behaviors, the less opportunity for them to become ingrained and for those negative associations to solidify. It's about breaking the cycle and creating a more positive environment.
It's about building resilience, right?
Yes.
Giving them the skills to navigate life's challenges without resorting to those maladaptive coping mechanisms.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And recognizing that we all have that capacity for growth, for change.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From that role of therapy as counter control to debunking that myth of pent-up behavior. And it all comes back to shifting our focus from those inner states to the observable behavior in the environment.
It's a paradigm shift.
It is.
And it has huge implications for how we understand and address human behavior.
But Skinner didn't stop there. He delved into a wide range of other therapeutic techniques.
He did.
Recognizing that not all challenges come from excessive punishment.
Right.
You mean situations where individuals haven't necessarily experienced harsh punishment, but maybe they've lacked adequate support
Exactly.
or guidance?
He talked about situations where those ethical or governmental or religious forms of control might have been inadequate or insufficient to help the individual develop those skills and behaviors needed to navigate life effectively.
So in those cases, therapy might focus on providing that missing structure, that support system that maybe they didn't have before.
That's the idea. It's about filling in those gaps.
Right.
Giving them the resources and opportunities to learn and grow.
And sometimes therapy might even involve constructing like a whole new repertoire of behaviors
It might.
that are more adaptive and more functional and more aligned with the individual's goals.
Yeah, it's like building a toolbox.
Yeah.
Equipping them with the skills and strategies
Right.
to handle different situations
Yeah.
and make choices that lead to positive outcomes.
And a key part of that toolbox is self-control. The ability to regulate their own behavior, to make choices based on long-term goals rather than short-term impulses.
Exactly.
So in a way, therapy is about empowering them to become their own best advocate,
It is, yeah.
to learn how to manage their behavior
Right.
and create a life that's meaningful and fulfilling for them.
Absolutely. It's about fostering independence and self-efficacy and a sense of agency.
Wow, this has been a deep dive.
It has.
We've explored some pretty complex concepts,
We have.
but I think Skinner's insights have the potential to really revolutionize how we approach behavior change,
They do.
both of our professional work and our personal lives as well.
I wholeheartedly agree. And there's always more to explore and unpack and learn. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect
Okay.
and distill some key takeaways that we can apply to our work as ABA professionals.
Sounds like a plan. What are some key takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own work as ABA professionals?
I think one of the biggest is simply awareness, just remembering that control, while often necessary, can have those unintended negative consequences. And we as practitioners really need to strive to use those principles of behavior change ethically and in a way that minimizes harm.
So it's not just about what we're trying to change, but how we go about it. The methods we choose, the relationships we build, the environment, all of that plays a role.
Absolutely. We have to be thoughtful and individualized in our approach. There's no one size fits all. We need to consider their history, their sensitivities, and be aware of those potential unintended consequences.
It highlights how important that assessment phase is,
Oh, absolutely crucial.
Really taking the time to understand the person, the environment, the function of the behavior.
Couldn't agree more. And, another key takeaway, I think, and Skinner really emphasized this throughout his work, is focusing on what we can actually observe.
Right.
It's so easy to get caught up in trying to diagnose or label,
Right.
but ultimately, it's the behavior and those environmental factors that give us the best information.
It's about being those behavior detectives.
Exactly.
Looking for the clues, the antecedents, and consequences. And then we use that information to design interventions that address the root cause, not just the symptoms.
It's about asking those why questions. Why is this behavior happening?
Right.
What need is this meeting?
Yeah.
Once we understand the why, the how becomes so much clearer.
I think a third takeaway, and this might be the most important one, is remembering the power of collaboration. We can't do this work alone. We need to be working with the individual, their families, other professionals.
It's a team effort.
It is.
We need to be open to different perspectives,
Right.
different approaches.
Yeah.
And recognize that we don't have all the answers.
Right.
The best interventions often come from collaboration, drawing on the expertise of everyone.
It's about that shared ownership, everyone working towards that common goal with the individual at the center.
Exactly. And when we do that, when we have that mindset, that focus on collaboration and compassion, that's when we can make a real difference.
It's about empowering them, giving them the tools to create a life that feels meaningful.
Absolutely. It's about fostering independence, resilience, and a belief in their own ability to change their lives.
Well, I think we've done a great job unpacking some pretty complex concepts today. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through these fascinating insights from B.F. Skinner.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, read Skinner's work, and keep those conversations going. The more we understand about behavior, the better equipped we'll be to make a real difference in the lives of the people that we serve. Thank you for joining us on ABA Chapter Chat. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep the conversation flowing.